This is Mr. Brown's Basement, a channel devoted to repairing, restoring, and modifying vintage electronic gear, and other random stuff. I saw this radio up for sale on Facebook Marketplace. I liked the clean, functional design, so I drove to Brampton and picked it up. Before I get into the radio itself, I should say something about the background of the manufacturer, because with this company, things are just confusing. The company opened under the name Grimes Radio. According to one source, they changed their name to the Finola Company of Canada, though I've never seen a nameplate bearing that name. Then they changed their name to Dominion-Electrohome, and that's the name they used for a long time, though it was often shortened to Electrohome later on. Equipment that they marketed would bear the name Finola. That is not to be confused with the Finola brand from Italy. But their core business was manufacturing equipment for electronics retailers. They produced radios for the Eaton's department store under the names Minerva and Viking, which were both house brands. Note that there is a Minerva brand from France, which is not related. They made equipment for the Simpsons department store under the Serenader name, equipment for the Bay department stores under the Dictator name, for the McLeod's department stores under the Arcadia name, for the Lindsay music stores under the Lindsay name, but they also used the Monroe name and probably many more that I don't know about. So back to my radio. My radio is a 1U51E3 and is branded Viking for Eaton's. But it was also available as a Finola 1U51E3 and possibly other brands as well. Accessing the chassis is via a panel on the underside. If you think you just take out a couple of screws holding in the panel, then a few more holding in the chassis, then remove the knobs and the chassis will just drop out, think again. I don't know where it's caught yet. Maybe it's caught on the speaker, but there's no removing the speaker because I can't get my hands in there with the chassis in the way. So it must be caught on something. See that thing on the left? That's an asbestos sheet. It's a heat shield. It has to come out. And it'll have to come out outside because I don't want to deal with it inside. It's out. The speaker is connected up and there's no way that they can be separated, though I have a feeling, more than a feeling, that when it goes back together finally, it's going to have a disconnect in there because I'm going to put one in. This assembly here cannot be taken off. It's very fragile. The antenna wire goes to the loop antenna, and if I had taken this off entirely, there'd always be the risk of damaging this. On the bottom, the usual paper capacitors and carbon resistors that will have to be checked. One big, probably multi-section, yeah. We've got one black there and looks like 3 conductors over there. So 3-section electrolytic that has to go. This is what I'm going to use to replace the asbestos that was underneath the chassis. It's a piece of sheet metal that's been painted on both sides, and it will serve as a non-combustible heat shield. Not that I expect anything to start burning underneath the chassis. There really isn't much there that could, but still, you can't be too careful. The schematic for this radio comes from Radio College of Canada, sheet number 157. Like many Canadian sets, it can't be found in SAMs. There are 7 paper capacitors, including a line-to-chassis capacitor that must be replaced, and 3 electrolytics. The other capacitors are ceramic or mica and are usually left alone. That dial, it doesn't look like it's in great condition, but it might even be water damaged. I don't know. It feels like it's paper, or maybe on top of metal. This is just on-off volume. And this must be tuning right over here. And fortunately, maybe, I was going to say the string is not damaged, but I can't tell that yet. Maybe it's just, something is just not right here. The dial string is not riding on the pulley, it's riding on the stud that supports the pulley. And where did I see it? This is the dial light. It clips on right over there. This is going to have to be replaced. The insulation is deteriorating and it's broken through in a couple of places. I don't think I did this. It doesn't matter. I'd replace it. This varnished cotton insulation looks okay. I'm wondering if maybe this can be cleaned. Now this would be quite fragile, so I would not use alcohol. I would use just maybe a Q-tip and some water and see how it goes. Start in a corner where it can't be seen, and if that works, keep on going. Yeah, there's a lot of dirt here. And a little bit of rust and scratches too. Yeah, just a bit of dirt. Unfortunately, this cardboard is really way too fragile to work much harder than I've worked so far. I'm not getting any more dirt coming off, so the next thing would be taking off surface, which I don't want. And the idea that I had of using heat to take this off, I don't think so. I think that's on for good, whatever it is. I'm going to try to improve the appearance of the face by, first of all, painting the pointer, which I have with some acrylic, but also seeing which of the paints I have might cover up some of the wounds of the past. The speaker has a tear in it right there. Now, my experience with patching speakers is that if the tear is fairly close to the middle, it usually patches quite well, but when it goes into the very rim, it doesn't generally sound too good after it's been patched. The speaker's been patched, and it doesn't sound bad unless you turn it up right to the top, and then it's distorted. And then I don't think it's the patches in the speaker, I think it's the speaker. If I had to guess, I would say this is the original speaker cloth. On the other side, it's looking quite faded. And to be honest, I don't care for florals. It's going to be very difficult for me to do a good job to apply the new cloth inside. It just isn't a good working angle. Getting it so there are no wrinkles and it's completely flat. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this material. This material, it's like, I think it used to be called masonite or arborite, or something like that. Basically a compressed paper material which has a plastic finish on both sides. I'm going to cut this to the right size and apply the cloth to this and sandwich it between the speaker and the cabinet. Here's the finished material that I will be mounting the speaker on. It's amazing how small the speaker is. I think 3.5 inches or 3 3/8 compared to what it looks like on the outside of the cabinet. I stuck the cloth to the backing with this product, Mod Podge. It's not bad. The other product I've used is 3M spray, which is better, except the nozzle tends to clog up and it ends up wasting most of the can. So it ends up being not only a large nuisance, but very expensive. This is neither. Here we go with the cloth firmly attached to the board and ready to reinstall. That's the new speaker cloth. I think it looks much nicer than the older floral stuff. I'm going to replace this line cord. I don't trust old line cords, even if they're not in terrible condition. This is not in terrible condition, but it's going to go anyway. I'd like to test the tubes. They look brown inside, and that would lead some to believe that they're worn or worn out. You really can't tell from looking at a tube unless it's white. If it's white and chalky, the tube is broken. Otherwise, you really can't tell. You have to test it, either in a device like a radio or in a tester. The results are in. This first tube has a borderline section. I'll try the borderline tube, unless it just doesn't work. It should work. This one here is borderline. This one here, the SQ7, has 2 diode sections. One of those sections is bad, so that's no good. The audio output is weak. It would probably work at reduced volumes, but I'll probably replace that. And the one that looked sort of smoky on the inside, that one was really good. So no, you really can't tell. I've been wondering about this that exists within a braided shield. Well, here's the answer to the question. One of the 2 wires goes to one end of the volume control, and the other wire goes to the wiper of the volume control. In other words, I guess what you'd have to do is tune the radio to a place on the band where there's no station, and then connect up your phonograph, and that would play through without any static. Not exactly a good way of doing things. Normally you'd have a switch to disconnect the rest of the radio, maybe about there. But that's what they did. I had considered replacing this with something sort of standard, this, RCA female. But there is an issue. It is on the diagram. The black is actually connected to the line when the volume is all the way down. I don't think I want anything connected directly to the line that comes out of the receiver. So, and besides the fact that I'm not ever going to use it, I think I may eliminate this input, which was sort of stupid in the first place. This right here is a carbon composition resistor. In this case, 33 kilo ohms plus or minus 10%, reading the bands. And they do tend to drift, usually higher. They always have to be checked. Some of them are very, very close. For example, this one here, very close. It's 46K, it should be 47K. Some are way out. For example, this one here, which is supposed to be 33K but measures 125K. That's probably going to kill the oscillator. So a bunch of resistors have to be replaced, in addition to all the electrolytic and paper capacitors. To make it harder to screw up, not impossible, but a little bit harder, I make a diagram of the underside of each tube socket. Here I can see there are things that have to be left alone, for example, the mica cap and the filament, but things that need to be dealt with, like this 33K resistor and this 0.1 microfarad paper capacitor. After it's all done and I check it, I want to make sure it looks roughly like this. Certainly I'll check it over before I power it up. Here's the same section with new components. The 33K resistor is right there, and as you can see I've got spaghetti on it, so I know it's been done. And the new capacitor, but instead of putting it over there, I put it over here because it was easier. And again, spaghetti and twisted so that I can read the value. As is sometimes the case, you're dealing with what somebody else did and probably shouldn't have done. So this is the rectifier socket, and right over here is where the line is supposed to connect. Now, when I got this set, somebody else had put a heavy-duty, probably 16 gauge line cord on this, which probably wasn't the original. And in doing so, when they attached it, they broke the lug, which is right there. So in response, they soldered directly to where the tube pin goes in, which isn't right. They should have replaced the socket, which is a lot more work, which is really what should be done, which is what I'm going to do. This kind of socket is called a wafer socket because it's two Bakelite wafers riveted together, and that's the kind that will fit here. There are other kinds of sockets, but these were inexpensive and they worked relatively well. I just have to drill out the rivets and drop out the socket after doing a diagram for the 35Z5. Here's a better view of the socket now that it's out. You can see that the lug is completely gone. There is one other issue, and that is this socket has 1.5-inch mounting centers, and my wafer socket does not, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to use a different kind of socket. One of these. It's a better quality socket, and it has the right centers, but it won't look 100% original. So promise me that you're not going to look into the back of my radio. All right, the new socket is in with the two resistors, the 100 ohm and 2.2K. These three electrolytics, this one, and this one, are the equivalent of this. It's important to remember that V-, which is right there, is often not the same as chassis or ground, which is this lug, which is what it mounts on. That's a common mistake. Don't do it. It won't end well. I think it's good to go now. I've got the power cord hooked in, and there's a strain relief over there, and just a matter of putting in the tubes and getting out the variac. I've got a fuse in here, 1 amp fast blow, just in case. I've got the variac on the ready over here, and this meter here is going to measure the first B+ voltage, should top out around 115 if everything was operating, and the other should top out around 78. Having a terminal strip right near the edge makes it really easy to measure these voltages. So let's give it a go. Now nothing's going to happen until the rectifier begins to heat up. And that probably won't happen till 60 or 70 volts. The voltages are correct within 10%. I've got no smoke, but I've also got no sound. Yeah, it works. The other thing I've noticed is that this cardboard is interfering with the pointer, so I'm going to have to glue it and clamp it down. Otherwise it's going to bind, and that's a drag. And I'm going to see what else I can do about touching up the dial. The chassis is finished. The pilot lamp is on. It's an AC/DC 6.3 volt LED, and it works. It's a warm white. It works quite nicely. As I promised when I was taking this thing apart, I would put on a way to easily disconnect the speaker to make it much easier to remove the chassis. So this is a quick disconnect for high voltage light fixtures. I learned about these a few years ago. Really useful, expensive, but worth it. One thing I do with old sets like this is replace their old metal feet, they're like thumbtacks, with something better. These do terrible damage to wood floors, and there's no point in trying to cover them. They just need to be pulled out. And I've put in these, which are that have felt tips. They're much better. You can slide the radio and so on. Finally, because the chassis is near line potential, it's only separated by a capacitor, I'm putting screw head caps on top of the two mounting screws so that no one could accidentally touch these screws and get a mild shock. Highly unlikely, but for the price of 2 screw head caps. Who cares? After touching up some of the stain, it's beginning to look a little bit more respectable. And you know what? That dial isn't too bad. Yeah, okay. I still have to clean the knobs one more time and then install them and wait for the stain to dry, of course, and then it's done. I hope you enjoyed watching this video from Mr. Brown's basement. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos.